Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. Today, I have Bob Donaldson with me. He is a change expert with Collaborative Strategies Consulting, Inc. out of San Ramon, California. What's different about Bob is he can teach leaders to create high-performing teams by turning their employees into highly effective human beings. Bob is the author of Collaborative Power Grab, a step-by-step guide for every leader on how to invite, attract, and cultivate collaborative power. Bob, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Great to be here.
So, Bob, I always like to start with getting some background about people. Like, how did you get into doing what you're doing? You can take us back as far as you like. You can spend a few minutes if you like. But what got you into training?
Well, it was a combination of training and leadership training. It does go back a little bit, but it's not a boring story. I've always had a penchant for leadership, typically kind of saying, hey, who wants to be the foreman of the jury or what have you? It's somehow I always get selected for those positions. The most interesting part of my story, I think, is all the way back to 1985. And it was my first management position at a new agency. And they had just suffered a very long labor strike. And I'm telling you, the bad blood was flowing down the hallway and into every room, metaphorically speaking, but you'll see why I borrow this metaphor. When I got there, people are stealing lunches out of the refrigerator. They're stealing personal items out of each other's lockers. There's drug and alcohol use on company time. Cars are being keyed, and nails are going against car tires. And after I got there, I looked around and looked at this absolute mess. And I almost turned around and said, man, I got to get out of here. But I decided not to. And I decided that there's got to be a way to influence this. I look back at my life, and I do kind of specialize in messy situations. So, hey, why not? And lo and behold, 5 years later, this agency was an industry leader. And the tools that I used to make that rather astonishing transformation was the basis for the rest of my life's work. And so what I did over the next 38 years, which brings us to the present day or so, for almost 40 years, is I looked at when I was in the field and the fur is flying, and of course my car is getting keyed, and of course there's nails against my car tires, right?
Oh no. Mm-hmm.
I started using a lot of different techniques that I thought would work. Some did, some didn't. I kept accumulating the ones that did, and of course those ultimately became the collaborative group behaviors, right? But also, I was just a guy in the trenches trying to make things work, right? And I didn't always know why it worked. And I thought, well, I'll figure that out later. So what I did over the next 38 years is I added to more and more of these tools to that toolbox. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a toxic work environment. It can be any type of work environment whatsoever, but it'll be improved based on these same concepts and these same step-by-step starting now actions. And so that brings me to the present day. And so my toolkit that is easily transferred over to clients and people that want to improve their group performance and increase job satisfaction at the same time. Those two things always go hand in hand. Is what I'm all about today. Whether it's the book or it's the online course Journey of Heroes, this is all a way of transforming this information to groups so they can use it. It also avoids a lot of the downfall of the current leadership training foibles that we're seeing nowadays. Not all leadership training is created equal. We could talk about that a little bit later.
Yep, I want to get into that. So, So, what do you mean? What's wrong with some of the modern day leadership training? Why is it failing? Is it failing? What's your approach? How is it different?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to name drop a little bit here. Jeffrey Pfeiffer leads the Department on Leadership at Stanford University. And he wrote a book a couple of years ago, maybe it's 3 or 4 years ago now, called Leadership BS. And if anybody has their fingers on the pulse of the leadership training industry, it's Jeffrey. And he noted that I think it was 2019 or 2018, it was just pre-COVID, that $100 billion worth of leadership training was expended, or corporate training was expended in the United States with almost nothing to show for it. Now, that's almost a knee-bending statistic, $100 billion,
right?
And almost nothing to show for it. So
that's really, that's contrary to what I've been saying, not often enough, but I've been saying to people over the years, which is like, if we're in a recession, marketing and training are the two things you need to keep going, because if you cut marketing, then you're cutting your lead generation. If you cut training, then you're cutting down or reducing the quality of the people that are working for you. They'll go elsewhere.
Right. That's absolutely right. And I can circle back to that in just a moment. Pfeiffer's primary point is that a lot of training was happening, but the training that was happening was ineffective.
Okay.
Now, the organizational development industry, and I got to be very careful here, but it has kind of a miserable track record.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what happens in the organizational development industry is they're chasing the next shiny thing.
Okay.
So whether it was TQM back in the old days or 360 evaluations, which is kind of the current fling thing, and there's a lot of reasons why this stuff is not effective. And so I can just tick off some of those top items if you'd like.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Number one, a lot of what's produced in the leadership training industry is the result of a study, where if you're in a leadership position and you want leadership training, I warn everybody in those positions, please learn from somebody who's done your job successfully. Okay. And that changes the lesson plan completely, number one. Number two, you'll go to this, 48-hour, 2-day weekend leadership training session. And the Venn diagrams look great, and a lot of pontifications that you're given that you're going to implement Monday morning. And it almost all of it fails for the following reasons. One is, how do you interpret a pontification? If somebody says, hey, you need to increase your communication, or you need to give your group a vision. Well, how do you do that? And so one of the things I do in my starting now actions is I give people the exact behavior to use that next morning. And so there's no room for interpretation. If you say give people a sense of vision, you've got a lot of background. I've got a lot of background, but our answer is going to be slightly different. So what answer is that new leader going to learn from that new leadership training session? Number one. Number two, a lot of what they propose is just too complicated to implement. I mean, we all are fitting 10 gallons of work into a 5-gallon bucket every day, right? So you give somebody something new, if it's too complicated or too time consuming, it's unworkable. And
Well,
so,
I think
so
that
whatever
makes
you're going to,
sense. But
yeah,
but I mean, when I think of leadership training, leadership development, I think of some of the names that are popping through my head as I'm listening to you are uh, Peter Drucker, who obviously has, a huge library of books that he's written. And I think of him more of as a consultant than a trainer, although, he had an educational program. I think of Jim Collins. I think of people who are thought leaders, and maybe they're not leadership trainers. I'm trying to understand that who Pfeiffer was studying when he was looking at leadership training and development. Was he looking at leadership training companies that he was evaluating their results on? And it was this scientific data, or was anecdotal? I mean, what can you let's go a little more deeper into like what's missing and what's broken.
the people I'm reaching out to right now, Jonathan, they've never heard of Collins.
Mm-hmm.
They've never heard of Drucker.
And is that because you're working mostly with middle managers and frontline supervisors, and they're not like
This is a whole, yeah, this is a whole new generation.
okay,
I mean,
so
part of, and I have a magazine article coming out in the not too distant future about how some of these principles really resonate with the millennials and the Gen Zers.
mm-hmm.
Now, the millennials, the top end of the millennials, all turning 40. But if I go out to the millennial turning 40 group and the Gen Zers who are about 15 years younger than them, they haven't heard any of these people. The fact is that people are it's like dog paddling in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
You're just a cork sitting there in a massive amount of information. And you know that by now. I mean, this has been the topic of huge amounts of people that are smarter than me about it. And there's a snowstorm of information out there. So how do you cherry pick out what seems to work? Now, certainly for those of us that enjoy and learn from thought leaders, there is something to tap your chin about as you're reading some of that stuff. But what these people need is practical in the trenches. What do I do right now? And if you can't transform your message into that, it's going to bounce off the atmosphere. It's not going to sink in.
I can appreciate that. I worked with a professional once. It was a therapist. I was having some challenges with my
Sure.
teenage turning 20 something year old child. And this person had a lot of expertise. And rather than sort of help me try and figure out what to do, he was very pointed, very specific. He said, do this, say that, do this. If you get this type of a request, send me the text request. I'll teach you how to respond to it. And I had to have him in my camp for a while because I was really troubled with how to raise this teenager and who wasn't really responding. And if I had listened to another therapist, they would have just said, almost kind of well, what do you think you should have said? And how did that make you feel? And like, okay, that might have been helpful, but it wasn't really what I needed. It wasn't going to get me from where I was to where I am today and where I needed to be. So I understand that. It was very, very tactical.
Exactly. And I think that's where we drop the ball nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very tactical. What we want is somebody saying, boy, I have this very specific problem. And we want them to be able to look into their toolbox and go, oh, that's the tool for this, which is exactly what your therapist was doing.
Right.
He was handing you boatloads of tools.
Right.
You were lowering into your toolbox. And I love this metaphor because it applies so many places. And Jonathan, those tools that went into your toolbox, they went in there forever.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. I've been able to help others with that as well. So what are some of the biggest problems that middle managers, frontline supervisors, or the folks that you're training, what are they facing? And
sure. Yeah, sure. I love that question because when I tell them what their problem is, if I don't word it just right, they don't always agree with me. So in other words, it's one of these cases where we don't know what we don't know. Okay.
Right.
So if you're a hardworking first line supervisor or middle manager, what you have in common is you got to make sure the team underneath you is performing in such a way that it's giving you the outputs that senior management wants from your team. Mm-hmm. So whether you're a department head or a shift lead, that is a common problem amongst people in that strata of the organization, right? And so what that means is anytime the team below them is slightly underperforming, boy, they're going to inject themselves with direct supervision and make sure that output looks the way it's supposed to. Now, there's a difference between managers and leaders, and we can get into that in a little bit.
Okay.
But a lot of times, first line
on that, by the way.
Yeah. Oh,
I think it's really important for people to understand the distinction between the two because it's huge.
It's giant. And anybody that's in a leadership position, if they don't understand the differences, which I do go over those in my book. Mm-hmm. A quick plug, sorry. That they miss the boat. And so here's a perfect example of that. A lot of times, first-line supervisors and middle managers that are having to give huge amounts of direct supervision to the team below them because of these underperforming issues see themselves as extremely hardworking leaders. But actually, you're just a hardworking manager.
Right.
Okay, so you're just injecting yourself and you wipe your brow at the end of a 10-hour day and go, boy, did I ever earn my pay today. And you did, but look what's happening. A lot of overtime, weekend work, cutting into family time. And are we forgetting that the reason we're doing this is for our family? Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. Mm-hmm. So my point is that you can actually increase the performance of that team and be able to pull back the direct supervision and get the outputs you still need. And so when I can make that kind of a conversation start, just like I am right now with you, then they start to listen. Because I said, man, you can get your family time back. You can reduce all that overtime that you're not paid for because your management, your salary, right? It's not hourly.
Right.
And people love.
So how do they do this? How do they quickly increase the productivity of an underperforming team that they're leading?
Sure, you bet. So what you do is you go into all the skill sets that the people need in that group, and you train them to expert levels.
Okay.
The moment you start turning these people into experts, problems start to get solved that you don't even know about because now they're an expert at doing it. So let me go there for a second. I have 8 main categories that I approach in turning people into experts. Mission priorities.
Right.
Culture or workplace culture, protect and promote, effective interpersonal relationships, high quality communication, technical competency, productivity, problem solving, and continuous improvement. Okay. For each one of those categories, I have starting now actions for every middle manager and every first line supervisor to start that process. So let me give you a great example because there's not enough time to go over everything, obviously. Sure. But here's the big one. Giving a presentation in Chicago and another one in Denver last year to these very large associations. And we got to the Q&A and I said, hey, can I see it? And this is probably about 50 or 60 people in each one of these audiences. I said, please, I would like to see a show of hands. Who here is frustrated by the problems that are showing up on their desk that they think should have been solved by the team below them? And of course, there's a huge show of hands, right? And then I said, listen, now my next question is not here to embarrass you, but I just need to know, how is your problem-solving training course going? And there's just a bunch of blank stares.
What training course?
Yeah, nobody's hands go up. So here you have is a bunch of hardworking, intelligent leaders going to these national conferences, and they're frustrated by the problems that are landing on their desk, and they don't even have a problem-solving course that they're teaching the people below them. to relieve themselves. Okay.
Right.
Which is why you have consultants, which is why you hired the therapist. This is why you hire people like us to come in and go, hey, listen, I have a problem solving training course that I can give you, and I can train you to train your people. My job is to work myself out of a job. I don't want to be around any longer.
Of course. So what might be in that problem solving training course? What are some things that might be part of that curriculum or are part of that curriculum?
Yeah, you bet. Now, my systematic problem solving process is unique to me, but it's really not unique to the problem solving experts of the world.
Okay.
So let's see if we can avoid some of the pitfalls. First of all, part of my training course goes over the 6 reasons why people don't even recognize problems. Problems left alone start to get bigger, usually, right? And as the problem gets bigger, it's harder to knock down. So I train people on how to recognize problems. And a problem left alone is kind of like that hurricane that's spinning off all these children tornadoes, because now that problem is creating a bunch of other problems, right? And so you got to catch it early. And so I teach people how to recognize that problem. And then once they do, they say something. Tell your boss. I don't know how many times I've been in a leadership training situation, and it's been training. I've been training now for over 25 years, and if I've heard this once, I've heard it a million times. Boy, if they had just told me about it, if they just had told me about it when they knew about it, right, I would have been able to solve this problem with just a fraction of the amount of time and energy and money it would have taken me, right? And so the first step is you tell somebody, create a problem-solving team. And there's 8 steps, and I'll just go over some of the most important ones. One is, don't confuse the step of developing a solution with the step of developing what you think the causes are.
Okay. Part
of the reason people think that they're better problem solvers than they actually are is because they confuse that. Right. They don't spend time enough to develop what the real cause is. They jump to the first cause that they see, and then they apply a solution to it. And the next thing you know, the dumpster fire behind the welding shop is a big surprise when it shouldn't be. No, you have to stay in the cause area for a while.
Yes.
And don't bring other brains in on the game, Bring the right people around the table, develop what the top 3 causes are, and then say, hey, you know what? We think this one is in the lead. Let's apply a solution and see what happens.
Yeah. Now, this is very interesting because one of the key components that I utilized in my CEO peer group, which I was trained by an expert who was in what is now called Vistage. It was called Tech back in those days. But one of the key things is where a CEO brings to his peer group of other CEOs in other industries, and there's usually, for people who are not familiar with it, maybe 12, 16 people in the room. Someone presents the problem succinctly enough so that it doesn't go on and isn't explained away. And then people go around the table asking clarifying questions to get really clear on what the problem is, so that they don't jump to conclusions, because there was always a few people at the table that wanted to immediately give someone the solution, but it wasn't always, and it might have been a good solution, but it wasn't necessarily the best or the right one for that person at that time. And so by going around the room and asking questions, and not leading questions would be asking a question with the solution already in mind, trying to direct them and guide them to that, right? So that it would be like what I literally called clarifying questions. So this is a great process. And then after all that information and all the questions were finally off, had gotten off the minds of the people around the room, then one by one, individuals around the room would say, well, this is what I would recommend as a solution. And then after the person who presented the problem listened to all the solutions, only then did he or she say, based on what I heard, like, this is what I think I'm going to do at this point in time. And so it's no wonder that, what you're teaching is such a core piece of a CEO peer group. And I'm sure that every CEO peer group in this country runs a process somewhat similar to that. So
if they're success,
if they're well run.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. And I was just going to ask, if they're successful, that's exactly what they're doing.
Right.
And thank you for that. Or thank you for sharing that. My point is that when you turn your employees into highly effective humans, they give back to you as a super employee.
Yeah.
So problem solving is just one of these things. When I started doing this, in the different places I was working, it was funny. People would stop by the office and say, "Hey, Bob, this stuff works at home too." I said,
yeah, no kidding, right?
I said, yes, it does, because you're turning into a more effective human. So you're a more effective human wherever you go, because humans are humans wherever you go, right?
Yeah.
And so when we start talking about things like developing a relationship with your boss, how do you actually do that? What's the conversation look like? And I hand that over on a silver platter. Or why making observations of good performance of your team below you? I mean, there's probably moral implications to doing that, because you're just being a good boss. But also, every good performance you recognize, the chances of it being repeated skyrockets.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and isn't that what you want, right? And so there's a whole long laundry list of things that kind of fit into that same problem solving type of an approach. Not to beat up on NASA, but if you look at the commission reports for the Challenger and the Columbia disasters, and of course, it's heartbreaking stuff. And I don't want to. In 2020 is harsh. But if you go through some of that forensics, some of the failure analysis, we're all susceptible to making really lousy decisions, regardless of how smart we are. We need a process. And so that's what I try to do with the problem solving process, or whether it's training or encouraging the group to innovate. There's certain practical steps you can use on all of these things that make people a lot better at what they do, just generally in life. And then when they show up at work, they're doing the same thing for you.
Great. So let's go over what those 8 areas are again, because I think it's really important. You've looked at training, and you've identified what you think are like key chapters of the course or of the book. I imagine actually your course covers each one of these 8 areas. Because they're so important. Is one more significant than the other? Because certainly problem solving, I think that's huge. But I guess the other ones, like communication, is also really huge. What are some of the others again? Let's just talk about them a little bit.
You bet. And so the 15 steps that I use, and that have embedded within them starting now actions, so people can just use the step-by-step process. Mm-hmm. And as they're using it, they'll figure out, okay, this is why it works. Now, the book gets into the theory as well, along with the practical application. The reason I bring that up is because those 8 categories are filtered into these 15 steps in various ways. But it's fun to talk about it from a category standpoint, because you get a lot smarter about the kind of the foundation of what I'm going after. Mm-hmm. So let me go ahead and do that quickly. Hold on. Sorry, I'm not. I did not have my computer plugged in, and now I do. Okay. Mission. Simple word, not well used in a lot of organizations. If you have a mission statement along with value statements and maybe some strategy statements, it helps define success for everybody. If you haven't done work with mission and values, and a lot of times when you bring that up and people start rolling their eyes, the fact is that
key thing in all the work I do, and I've probably talked about it multiple times on this show, but you got to get your purpose and your values really clear.
Absolutely. And what that does is you're defining success. Mm-hmm. So everybody's comparing what's going on in the field to this list of things. And if you don't have this list of things, then everybody's making up their own definition of success.
Right.
So it's a little like herding cats. Yep. And everybody feels good, but they're following their own definitions of success, which may not fall into that envelope of purpose and values from a group standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I've learned about mission, which is just wild, is, well, I consider it wild because I guess this is kind of the stuff I do. But when you have people that are super mission and value and purpose oriented, I'll use your word because it's perfect, is they know how to prioritize their work.
Mm-hmm.
And people that don't have that definition of success for them, they don't have that target of what they know is how I measure my success. They run into doing the second most important thing first. And I'm telling you, I've gone into groups where that is so bad. If you're doing the second most important thing first, you're susceptible to doing the ninth most important thing first.
Right.
And now that's a disaster. One more thing on mission. You got the silos, right? You got the different departments, the different silos. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that has problems is because I have a mission. I've got my people working in my department, Department A, and we're doing really, really good. But departments have to lean on each other because they need stuff from each other. Mm-hmm. Well, here comes Department B, and it says, hey, you guys, I need stuff from you guys. And Department A goes, oh, okay, sure. Well, what Department A will do so many times is they'll prioritize their own tasks first, and Department B comes in as the bottom list of priorities. But if you look at what Department B is asking, and you compare it to a mission or purpose or values, you go, oh my God, what Department B is doing, it should be prioritized above our own task because it's that important. So when you have mission and purpose and value and things like that defined, then it helps breaking down those silos.
Right.
And it's almost magical because everybody understands what the priorities are.
Understood. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we don't really have much more time. We need to wrap up. So let's just go over what are those different parts of the course. Tell us a little bit about your online course.
Sure. Journey of Heroes is essentially I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not, but
this is it'll be seen. But
okay, that's fine.
It's a 5-week online coaching course. Is that what it is?
5-week online coaching course. If you're an individual, you're in these every week, every 2-week feedback sessions where people can submit questions and I can give some live answers. Mm-hmm. It goes over the exact group of starting now actions, the 5 step-by-step actions of how you develop an outrageously awesome relationship with your supervisor and support them like they've never been supported before. It goes over the 10 steps below you to maximize the team performance of the folks below you. Each one of those 10 steps has a handful of starting now actions that you don't have to interpret. All you got to do is start using it. Mm-hmm. The Journey of Heroes is 33 really short video presentations. They can be listen only, but the video presentation, and each one of those video presentations has a downloadable guide that the student can have for their lifetime laboratory. Mm-hmm. And then what we do in our coaching sessions is as people are progressing through those 33 very short, very concise videos, we're talking about how to apply them and any stumbling blocks that they might be running into. And then at the end of the course, you have these 23 downloadable guides, which is essentially, similar to what's in the book.
Right.
But what we learn is that leaders that can actually take a book and turn it into a program, pretty tough to do, which is why the Journey of Heroes online coaching program was developed.
Got it. Well, that's a pretty thick looking book for those who can see it on YouTube. Where do they find this, Bob?
Collaborative Power Grab is on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books.
Okay. And the course, though, where do they find that?
Well, the course can be easily captured by going to our website, which is thelostartofcollaboration.com.
Okay. thelostartofcollaboration.com.
Exactly right. You can take an initial masterclass and book a call. Also, you can go to the back of the book, and it has instructions on how to get to the Journey of Heroes.
Collaborative Power Grab. Okay.
Yeah. It also has a phone number on the back if somebody wants to give me a call.
There you go. Awesome. Okay. Bob, thanks so much for being on the show. You and I are thinking alike when it comes to the importance of training. It's so important to develop people. And some of these things that seem really basic, well, of course, you could be basically good at it, or you could be competent at it, or you could become advanced or even expert at it. And you and I both agree that if we train our people to be expert, then we can accomplish so much more, right? Our teams will be so much more competitive, so much more effective, and they can execute at a much higher level. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you for the invitation. It was wonderful speaking with you. I do think that we are kindred spirits here. I think we can agree that most of the world is just simply undertrained.
Exactly.
And a lot more things go wrong simply because the people are incompetent, not because of maliciousness. Yeah. So we're helping our fellow humans and just making a better life for themselves. So thank you for the invitation, Jonathan.
Bob, thanks for being on the show. And folks, if you got some value from the show, please give us a good rating on your listening podcast application of choice. Right. Watch us on YouTube and check out Bob Donaldson at thelostartofcollaboration.com. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.